Thanks for joining us today. Hello and welcome to Business Daily. I'm Iji in Seoul. Before we dig into our stories for today, let's first take a quick look at the day's highlights. There are high hopes that Moody's latest ratings upgrade for Korea will help prevent unwanted circumstances triggered by the recent U.S. rate hike. But others are saying this is not all good news. We sit down with an expert to talk about this. Korea's pledge to cut greenhouse gas emissions ring hollow as its per capita coal consumption climbs to 5th in the world. But first, Korea's rapidly aging population and their growing need to clear out debt could take a toll on the real estate market in the next 3 to 4 years. Now, that's a warning from a report by the central bank. It says baby boomers born between 1955 to 1963 will try to lower their debt burdens as they face retirement by selling their tangible assets, including real estate property. As a result, the Bank of Korea expects home prices to face downward pressure. The central bank adds that this trend will start to gain traction from 2018, when the population of those over the age of 60 begins to rise. 80% of the assets held by households in the 55 to 74 age bracket are in physical properties such as homes, while the amount of financial debt that those in their 50s and 60s have to pay back takes up almost half of the country's total financial debt. Ratings agency Moody's has recently upgraded Korea's credit rating to the country's highest ever, citing relatively strong economic and fiscal strength despite sluggish exports. Good to hear, but some experts say it's too early to pop those champagne bottles.
International credit ratings agency Moody's raised Korea's issuer and bond ratings to AA2 from AA3, while changing the outlook from positive to stable. This announcement follows Moody's earlier upgrade on Korea in April, after Standard & Poor's and Fitch all upgraded the country's credit ratings earlier this year. The AA2 rating is the third highest rating given by Moody's, with only 6 other countries out of the group of 20 nations currently having attained that level. And the Korean government is pinning high hopes that this will keep foreign capital from flowing out in the face of growing uncertainties in the global economy, including the U.S. rate hike and slowing growth from China.
I believe Moody's was confident in the government's track record in implementing structural reforms, as well as our efforts to revitalize the Korean economy.
But some say this change is not enough reason to celebrate. Experts say the credit rating upgrade only means the country's ability to repay debt has increased, and that it doesn't necessarily reflect an improvement in the economy. In the global financial market, Korea is seen as a big investment draw, with its largest ever foreign reserves and a 44-month-long current account surplus streak. But there are growing concerns over the health of the economy, as its exports are estimated to record negative growth next year, and its household debt continues to stand at record high levels. So with growing calls on the government to find ways to deal with struggles families and businesses are facing, how can Korea maximize the benefits from the latest ratings upgrade?
And to tell us more about this, Professor Yang Jun-suk from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you, Professor.
Happy to be here.
So Moody's upgraded Korea's ratings to AA2 with a stable outlook. What does this exactly mean?
Okay, well, we're at the same rating as France. We're slightly below the United Kingdom, and we're slightly above China and Taiwan.
And Japan.
And 2 steps above Japan.
Oh, wow.
So in that sense, we seem to be doing very well. But this is, I think, a combination of the ongoing global recession, where most of the advanced countries are not doing well, and a series of lucky breaks for Korea. So while we should be happy that we got such a good rating, we shouldn't put too much faith on it.
And, some think that this upgrade comes at quite an odd time, considering that Korea is faced with a lot of external uncertainties, including the U.S. rate hike and the slowing Chinese economy. So at this point, we're wondering, what kind of strengths did Moody's see in Korea that led to this upgrade?
Well, you have to remember that this is a sovereign credit rating, so it measures whether government will pay the money that they borrow back. So it doesn't necessarily measure the private sector It only measures the private sector insofar as whether the private sector will be strong enough to pay enough taxes so that the government can pay its money back. So Korea has fairly good macroeconomic variables. We have low inflation without being deflationary. We have higher growth rate than most of the G20 countries, though it's low by our standards. But compared to other advanced countries, we're going to do fairly well. And for the factors which worry us, such as the household debt, well, those are private problems, not necessarily government problems. So those weren't counted very heavily. And then the biggest problem that Moody's probably saw, or the biggest factor that the Moody saw, was probably the government debt and government deficit. And at least from the OECD standards, which is what they use to compare different countries, we're not doing that badly. So I think those were the major factors that Moody's were looking at.
And of course, in response to this upgrade, the Korean government said this would be a positive news for the Korean economy. What kind of positive effects is the Korean government expecting from this, and do you think this will be effective?
Okay, well, I don't think the credit ratings have been doing a very good job in actually predicting whether they will go into crisis situation or not. We saw that in the subprime mortgage crisis in the US, the Greek debt problem. So insofar as confirming that Korean economy is safe, I wouldn't put too much faith on it, but because the Moody's raised its credit rating, I think Korea will have to pay less interest when it borrows money from abroad. So that will be a great help to Korea.
But then, like we did see in the report, this is not all good news. And like you said, looking back in 1997, that was when Korea was hit with the currency crisis. And that was also when Korea received quite high credit ratings from international ratings agencies. Can you tell us more about that?
Okay, well, during 1997, when before the Korea was hit by the financial crisis, Korea actually had fairly good ratings, not as high as it is now, but only a grade or two grades behind. So we were at the very middle of the investment grade rating, and then suddenly the financial crisis hit, and we dropped by 5 to 7 ratings.
Oh, wow.
So just within a period of 3 months, we went from the middle of investment grade to the bottom. Of non-investment grade.
Wow.
So in a sense, these ratings agencies cannot really forecast the future. They have to follow what they see. And so I think the financial crisis in Korea, as well as the subprime crisis, the Greek crisis, shows that they're not really very good at predicting.
So you're saying that we shouldn't depend on this for an outlook on a country's economy, as well as the health of the overall economy.
Yes, but it does point out that the international investors seem to be very hopeful about Korea. So that's always a good thing. That means they do have confidence in Korea. So at least for now, if Korea goes through with all the reforms that they're planning to, I think the international investors will look very favorably on Korea.
And also, the Moody's actually said that Korea, the biggest challenge awaiting Korea is whether or not it's going to succeed in carrying out its structural reforms. Can you tell us more about that?
Okay, well, Korea has the labor market reforms. Korea has been always cited because it has very rigid labor practices, and that has been a factor in most people figure that that's a factor in hindering Korea's growth. Also, there is some legitimate concerns about the foreign debt and the government debt. While it is low by OECD standards, if you add in some other factors like state-owned enterprises, then the Korean debt is much higher than what is seen by the OECD standards. And that is a legitimate concern for the Moody's sovereign rating because, well, they measure whether the government can pay its debt back. And if Korea is going to pay for all these state-owned enterprises debt, that means it's much weaker than what is seen by the OECD standards.
All right, then what are some other factors that could trigger another upgrade or even a downgrade on Korea's credit ratings?
Okay, well, first to begin with the bad news. If Korea does not go on with the reforms, if there's a lot of resistance to further reforms, if the government and the National Assembly cannot get along more harmoniously, then that will be factors for a downgrade in the future. For the upgrade in the future, if we go on with all the reforms, if the global economy recovers, especially China, then I think that'll be a legitimate cause for upgrade.
So there's even room for even higher ratings for Korea.
Again, this particular ratings hike was a combination of good factors for Korea and bad luck for a lot of the other major economies.
Right.
So if we can strengthen the good points that Korea made, there is some room that Korea will go up.
All right. Thank you so much for coming in today, Professor.
Thank you.
At a time when advanced countries are working hard to cut their coal consumption, it looks like Korea has been moving in the opposite direction. A new report shows that Korea has the 5th largest per capita coal consumption in the world. Our Kim Min-ji reports.
Koreans are big consumers of coal. According to the International Energy Agency, the country's per-person coal consumption is the 5th largest in the world, consuming almost 2.3 ton coal equivalent, or TCE, which is a unit representing how much energy is generated by burning 1 metric ton. Topping the list is Kazakhstan, followed by Australia and Taiwan. Korea even outpaces China and the US, themselves big consumers of coal, as a country. While major OECD countries have seen their coal consumption go down, Korea's has been going in the opposite direction for the last 25 years. In 1990, the OECD average stood at 1.43, dropping to 1.24 in 2010. Korea's corresponding figure came to 0.85 in 1990, but since then it has been growing more than 4% annually. Many advanced countries have been opting for coal-free policies, as coal accounts for almost half of greenhouse gas emitted while burning fossil fuels. But Korea's coal consumption is only set to increase further. The country currently generates over 27,000 megawatts of energy from its coal power plants. By 2023, the government plans to increase that figure by about 18,000, which is roughly 2/3 more than what is being produced now. Korea recently agreed at the Paris Climate Conference to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but critics say the country's pledges on emissions ring hollow as Korea's energy policies are heading in the wrong direction. Local environmentalists are calling for fundamental discussions on how Korea can meet such goals. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
Now, on that note, let's take a look at how the Korean government plans to drastically cut greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Here's our Lee Joo-young with more.
With a standing ovation from almost 200 world leaders and thousands of participants, nations from around the globe reached a universal agreement earlier this month to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. Korea's pledge was to reduce the country's greenhouse gas emissions by 37% from business-as-usual levels in 2030, down to roughly 535.8 million tons.
To meet our emissions reduction goal, we will initiate various policies, including emissions trade systems, and foster new energy industries so they become an opportunity instead of an economic burden.
Seoul's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said it will do so by building up an energy prosumer market, inviting consumers to power their own needs. The government will install more electric vehicle charging systems nationwide by 2020, while converting some 33,000 intracity buses to electric vehicles, with the goal to roll out at least 1 million eco-friendly automobiles by 2030. Jeju Island will be reborn as a so-called carbon-free area, swapping out all cars with electric vehicles and meeting 100% of its energy needs through renewable sources by 2030. Also, all buildings constructed after 2025 must be zero-energy buildings that have almost no net energy consumption. The government says Korea's energy market is likely to grow as big as $86.4 billion by 2030 and create some 50,000 new jobs along the way. but there are still growing concerns among domestic firms, especially from those in the steel manufacturing and oil refining sectors, as they carry the burden of having to cut over $400 million worth of emissions annually. Lee Ju-young, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. Until then, goodbye.